have liftoff, Houston.
Awesome.
All right, so welcome everyone to Casual Chat Live. I am Brian Germain, and I have a good friend of mine on here that I think you're really going to enjoy, Joe Stubbs. Welcome,
Hey,
Joe.
how's it going?
It's good. It's really good. It's a real pleasure to have you on here. So, let me sort of briefly describe you, but it's impossible to describe somebody like you fully in just a moment. So Joe has been flying airplanes for an awfully long time. He's one of my flight instructors. He's taught me a lot about aerobatics and all kinds of different things. But Joe is also an avid skydiver with a lot of experience and tunnel coach, right, as well.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I'm hoping we can spend some time talking about is Joe's work with collecting real data. There's a lot of folks out there with flight sites and different kinds of GPSs. But Joe, coming from an aviation background, right, you said, wait a minute, we can do better than GPS, right?
Oh, certainly, yeah. When you buy an airplane, like you buy a parachute, it would usually come with a manual, a pilot operating handbook. And in there are just all sorts of really important information that a pilot needs to be able to plan a flight or deal with emergencies or whatever the situation. And so when I came into skydiving, I saw this void, and I really wanted to be able to have answers to questions like, what is the glide ratio of my parachute, and what would be the best way to solve a given problem, like getting back from a long spot.
Right. It's something that I've been trying to do for a long time, but my means of collecting data were fairly untechnical, right? I can go to Google Maps and say, okay, this is how long this stretch of landing area is, and I know that I parked at this location on a no-wind day at 300 feet, not coming out of a turn, not in accelerated flight mode, and that's how far I got to landing. That's a quantity that is applicable, right? But to go further.
Yeah, it certainly works. You can look at your altimeter and you can look at how far you are, and provided there isn't much wind, you can get some good ideas about, what your glide ratio is, but
mostly.
But it really comes down to when things are changing, when they're complicated scenarios. That's when some really good data would help at least solve these problems. Because when I started, people would say, use front risers to get back from a long spot. Mm-hmm. Someone else would say use rear risers or brakes or don't do anything. Or
yeah.
And I thought, well, you couldn't all be right.
Exactly. But everybody has so much conviction around the campfire, that this is the truth. And where it's coming from is not always that scientific. A lot of it's closer to folklore. It's mysticism. Well, my great grandfather told me that the earth was created when a coconut fell on a turtle's head. Maybe the stuff that your instructor told you was not based in science.
Yeah, and it's difficult because when teaching and learning, there's a one concept of primacy. The first thing that you're taught, that's the one thing that you will really stick to and remember the longest, and it'll be the hardest thing to unlearn. And so if somebody told you that, and you did your whole skydiving career flying that way, and things worked out okay, that's a lot of evidence that maybe that was the right solution, or maybe there was at least some degree of truth to it, 75% or something. But often a pilot wants to go and try to optimize it, maybe not all the way to 100%, but we want to try to get closer.
Yeah. But to me, the pursuit of safety is the pursuit of truth, right? Which is, to me, the same goal of science in general. And so as we reach towards truth, we have to go beyond our assumptions, don't we?
Yeah, you want to verify what you're seeing. With let's say some scientific experimentation.
Yep. Actually, with that in mind, let me go get the probe. I was going to have it next to my desk, but it's right here. I know where it is.
Sure.
You can keep talking if you want.
Well, I created this this probe as a solution to collecting data about parachutes. If you talk about an airplane, when you were to buy your airplane, it comes with a manual, and that manual was created by some scientific folks with air data probes hanging out of the back or bottom of the airplane. And they would look very much like this. In fact, I designed this right off of a patent for an air data probe for a helicopter. That's what this came from. And I didn't follow the patent exactly, but I tried to come up with something that literally would hang off your shoelace. And inside there is a little computer, some pressure sensors, and then it collects GPS and everything. It's got a little USB port on it.
Yep, mini USB.
Yeah, there's even some lead there in the front. There's like a little pitot tube. Like if you look at your jump planes, they have like little tube, and then at the front, air gets sucked into it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, basically this device will collect information about your flight performance, and it just streams it to your iPhone, and then I wrote some software to analyze it afterwards.
It's a pretty simple app, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the app doesn't really. The app just collects everything and then gives you the raw data, which isn't the easiest to analyze. But
yeah, that's where you come in, right? I mean, I assume you didn't market this, or design this to be marketed to the general skydiving public. I mean, you can't have every canopy pilot flying around, but man, to be able to collect, honest to goodness data that's not skewed by wind. That's comparing your airspeed and descent rate, correct? I mean, that's
that's the main thing that this will collect: airspeed and descent rate. Yeah.
And to be able to say, all right, well, here's where I'm actually going and how fast I'm traveling. Then you can dig deeper into the truth of the assumption that when you load a wing at the same, if everything else is the same, if you load it more, it's going to simply travel faster along the same glide ratio slope. That's an assumption, but does it apply to parachutes?
Mm-hmm.
Now we can test that, right? I mean, I know that one of the parachute designers reported to me, and there's a lot of deliberate incorrect data that's passed around from designer to designer. Yeah, that goes on. But he said that basically when they loaded a 120 at I think it was like 5 pounds per square foot or something like that.
Okay.
They found that the glide ratio improved. That it didn't just travel faster along that line, it improved. That's what he said. Now, is that because the drag is collecting in the canopy and increasing the angle of attack at the higher airspeed? I don't know. Because two different drag sources, right?
We're talking about full flight, I assume, right? Like some fixed flight performance. I don't know. I have a really, really hard time imagining how that would be aerodynamically possible.
That's what he said. I mean, Dan Preston, we can follow up. Maybe he lied to me. I know that other parachute designers have lied to me about their data.
It's all good, but you look at that and you say, okay, well, that's great. Let's collect some data, and then assuming that that's true, then you would go into try to understand how could that happen.
Yeah. Well, of course, then whatever explanation you come up with, it is going to help you in an understanding, but it doesn't necessarily change the fact that it is true, and you now have to adapt to that truth, right? Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if we go to the rear risers to improve our glide ratio, we have to consider multiple variables, right? And one of the variables is if you take wind out of the equation, as your plots have shown, maybe you can show us a simple curve, what's called a polar curve. And while he's digging this up, what Joe is taking these data points and creating what in aviation is called a polar curve. Pole meaning the full opposite ends of the spectrum of performance. So the angle of attack in flight mode where it's unadulterated. You're letting the thing fly to increased angle of attack at the point of stall. That's the other end of it. And so here you go, Joe. So this is a nice bit of data that you got here. This isn't.
Do you see my cursor or?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a polar curve, and if you were to look at an airplane, you'd get something similar to this. And on the bottom, you've got airspeed, and this would be like 60 miles an hour, and that's 0, which we're not going to fly at 0. And here's your descent rate in like 5,000 feet a minute and so on. So this green dot just represents full flight. So in this particular aircraft or parachute, it's a velocity 84. We're sitting at about 50 miles an hour, and a descent rate of like 2,700 feet per minute down. Like that's if you just have the toggles up and just let it go.
So flying over 50 miles an hour, 50, what was it, maybe 50?
Yeah, like 50 miles an hour, and you're going down at whatever
2,600 feet a minute.
So like if you didn't flare, that's a lot of forward energy and down energy together that would probably not end well.
No.
Of course,
it would not feel good.
If you were to take a different parachute, this curve would be similar. It would just be kind of transposed, so it would be slower in the airspeed and less descent rate. So these curves are all aircraft have these curves, whether it be a Cessna 182 that you're jumping from, a Caravan, a parachute. They all have these curves. And as a pilot, I just needed to see it. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what this tool does. It pulls that out, and then I can look at this and answer some questions. When someone says, well, what is the optimal glide ratio for this parachute? Like, what is the best glide ratio we can achieve? We can look at this. And make a determination of what that would be.
All right, and so one of the things that's been very interesting for me is to be able to look at these kind of trends from real data on actual parachutes, not theory, and say, wait a minute, okay, look at that. Well, we knew that the stall airspeed for rear riser is certainly going to be a higher airspeed, right? And so this data confirms that, right? But what's interesting to me is that the pronounced hook, right? So the red line that people are looking at here, if you don't see it easily, the red line is the rear riser performance, whereas the yellow is the brakes. So if you notice the increased descent rate before the stall. And I assume that at this point you just sort of cut off the data because it gets real messy because the probe tumbles, right?
Well, I intentionally cut off the data around stall. Like I can't really measure what this looks like in stall, but theoretically, what happens is that let's say we're talking rear risers, we're following this orange curve. So we're full flight here, and then we add rear riser, more rear riser, and then we get down to somewhere around here, which is the optimal glide ratio. Mm-hmm. It's somewhere right along here. That's the optimal glide ratio. Mm-hmm. Then we go a little bit deeper, and we get this minimum sink, like the minimum descent rate. As we're let's say we want to stay up as long as we could on rear risers, that would be sort of at the bottom of this line. Right. And if we went any slower, we would actually be descending faster.
Yeah.
And then that's why this line climbs. And then right around here, it starts to stall and gets all wobbly, and the data is just all messy. And so I can't really plot this very well, but the stall is, if not here, it's maybe like right there or something.
Right. Well, I mean, to me, that's a little bit less the issue. The part that I'm interested in is, first of all, in teaching people about coming back from a lousy spot when it's a light wind day. We have to take wind out of the equation first, right?
Yeah,
it's really important to apply this information. The stall point, you're right on the edge of the stall point, unlike brakes, right? Between like 9/10 brakes and 7/10 brakes, probably not that much different, but there is a difference between 9/10 rear risers and 8/10, or, or 7/10.
Yeah, right. So yeah, like you pointed out, so this kind of hooks up. So let's say we call it the sweet spot, right? Like on brakes, the sweet spot's like anywhere from here to here. It's all kind of okay. There's an optimal point, but if you're off by a couple tenths, it's really not a huge degradation in performance. But on rear risers, you might be able to achieve a better performance here. Just see how the orange line kind of comes out ahead of the yellow line, just ever so marginally.
Right.
But it's just such a small sweet spot that you may not be able to really make use of it.
It's interesting. So, I mean, because there's an assertion that that using brakes is going to be better to improve glide ratio. And I think that people have to understand that is in the context of a tailwind.
In this case right here, like if there was no wind at all, so the way we see the best glide ratio on this particular graph is if you take a line from the zero, the origin here, and you were to draw a line, it would just intersect this curve somewhere around here. So this bottom part of the orange is the best glide ratio we can achieve.
Yeah.
So based on this curve, rear risers gives you the best glide ratio.
Mm-hmm.
If there were no wind whatsoever.
Yeah. Now there's another set of data that I saw that you had that related to wind.
Mm-hmm.
Then that was really cool. That was in one. You have it up. Wow, you're good.
Yeah.
So this one's. Can you help us understand this one a little bit better in the context of wind?
There's a lot more going on, but if you were to just take this previous one that we have here, this dot was your full flight, and then we have those two lines. Here, I've just transposed these in different wind conditions. So the middle one here, this is no wind, and it kind of looks similar to the previous graph, except that I've graphed it instead of by descent rate, I graphed it by glide ratio. So we still have airspeed here and have glide ratio. The green dots all represent full flight.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're looking for glide ratio, we want to, now this is effective glide ratio. So it's, actually over the ground.
Yeah, what I call relative glide. Right.
Right. Yeah, so relative glide, that's same term.
Yeah.
So, if we were to look at this middle one with no wind, and we wanted to see who could get the highest on the on this axis here, we could see that the orange can just get a little bit above the yellow. So rear risers will outperform brakes by just a margin, small margin, but it has a really small sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
So
you got to know where that is.
A lot of practice to be able to maybe get that extra 3%.
Right, a little more than half, right? I mean, that's the way I've been teaching is, say, 60% or so of the range from zero input to stall on the rears. A little, right? A little more than half.
Yeah, just based on this, it's like it's more than half. That sweet spot's more than half. The way that I kind of found works for finding this spot would be just kind of go on the rears, not when you're trying to get home, but when you're practicing this and trying to learn. If you go on the rears, you'll get to a spot, where it no longer you're able to control it. It gets wobbly. We're definitely past it. So we want to back it up to where it's, stable, and then maybe just a little bit faster than that. Because if we're flying, even if we were exactly at that right spot, if we're creating any kind of wobbliness, that's going to use up a lot of energy, and it's going to hurt our relative glide.
Sure. Yeah, oscillation is never the best way to fly, is it?
Yeah, we go that way, this way, that way. Yeah, it's not going to work.
Exactly. Yeah, you're eating up a lot of energy. So this is, I think it's fascinating, because what it's telling us, to me, is that when you've got a strong tailwind, that brake,
tailwind here,
the brakes, using deep brakes, it's got a wider flat spot. In other words, the range of the opportunity for excellence in the control stroke, it's a larger range where you have best glide. superior to rear risers, right?
Oh yeah, look at that. So like if you looked at this graph, so on a 45-mile-an-hour tailwind, which is pretty fast, and
Yeah, high pull cross country. You know, hopefully it's not that windy on the ground, but
yeah, and I mean here's a 15, so you could kind of look at both graphs, but
yeah, I think at 15 it shows enough displacement of the two curves that it's telling me that the deep breaks is a nice way to go in tailwinds.
yeah, you got a big wide area that you can work with. So if you're not perfect, yeah, you know, you're going to be in the sweet spot anyway.
Yeah.
And in this case, on this particular parachute in a 50-mile-an-hour tailwind, they are comparable. So rear risers, not only is it harder to do, and there's a bigger chance of error, it also is pretty hard on the arms. Whereas with the brakes, if you just kind of maybe, like, I don't know if you hook your
I'll like hold my main lift webs with my toggles in my hands, or I'll lean forward into my long, you know, I loosen up my chest strap, I lean forward into it and get my hands on top of my toggles, leaning forward like that. And I can do that for a long time, but those aren't the only techniques.
Yeah, and rear risers, I you know, in a pinch, I could hold them, you know, long enough to get back, but I might be burnt out and
yeah.
You know.
Well, and to me, the other issue is, you know, I mean, you can find body postures where you reach up to, you got your slider down in particular. This works great. You spread the rears, lean forward, and turn your shoulders around, and you're leaning on the rears that way. That works great for a long period of time. But here's the thing: your air time is significantly different, is it not? Right? The descent rate.
Your descent rates, yeah. Like if we were to go back over here, well.
I mean, 3/4 brakes or call it 9/10 brakes, or you're down into the, you know, relatively close to the stall point on the toggles. My experience is that it's going to give me more hang time on my way home. I'll make it home with more planning time. Or I won't be, maybe I will still have to land off, but at least I've got more time up there, slowed down my airspeed, slowed down my heart so I can appraise the situation.
Absolutely. I mean, you'll have a, you know, based on this, you're going to get probably 10% extra time, which is not insignificant at all.
No.
As you know, and the performance is very similar. So yeah.
So the curve tells you that you don't want to be riding the rears on the edge of the stall, but beyond that, the main thing is that you do something.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. Your glide ratio is very poor. Like these green dots, if you look, especially if you had a tailwind. Well, here, look, we're sitting with a tailwind on this one at under 3 to 1.
With a tailwind.
And we can go all the way to over 6 to 1 if we tried hard. That's, you know, more than double, almost close to 3 times as much distance over the ground, provided we had a really strong tailwind.
So for those that are struggling with math, consider that you're open at 3,000 feet. Now you can go 9,000 feet across the ground without batting an eye. That's a long way. Hi, Matthew. Here's Matthew apparently wanted to say hi, and apparently Daddy forgot to lock the door to the office. Matthew, sweetie, you're going to have to go upstairs. But thank you for saying hi.
I want to stay.
Yeah, I know. I know you want to stay, but I'm talking to Joe. It's very important. Are you having Fig Newtons? All right. So I have an idea. Joe, can you get started with the really cool trail video where you have the trail cam? And I'm going to run him up to his mommy. And I'm going to lock the door. All right, bye. I'll be right back. And you can talk over what you're doing there. This only takes a sec.
I just have to figure out how to stop showing my screen here. All right, here we go. Bear with me. I'll switch over to a video. Here's some coordinated turns. So this is some videos that I collected a couple years ago. It's part of a canopy course that I do, and so this is a camera that I have. Oh.
Ta-da! This is one of the coolest camera angles I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's a trailing camera, and you can just barely make out there's a line actually attached to, had it on one of the D lines, and it's just hanging out here, and it's kind of a neat thing. A guy in Australia makes them primarily for
paragliding, right?
Paragliding, yeah. Yeah, so this is just a video where I demonstrate coordinated turns, and it works really well in the classroom to kind of be able to look at video and actually look at, you can see the trailing pilot chute, and you can see which way the air is actually flowing.
Right, so in a crappy uncoordinated turn where you jerk a steering toggle, your parachute's not pointing where it's going, right? You got the relative wind cutting across the ribs, creating all kinds of turbulence, instability, balance of load is now shifted to one side of the parachute. It's not as stable, can't maneuver as well during the turn. People think, well, what maneuver during the turn? What the heck are you talking about? How about flaring? You know?
I do some of those too. I got some where we're
good
out of turns. When flying aircraft of any sort, be it a helicopter, a sailplane, a 182 Otter, there's always a high priority put into flying coordinated, and it's one of the first things that you learn how to do when you're learning to become a pilot. And I love that, at least you brought that to me in skydiving. This was not something that I was taught in my initial training in.
Who was? I wasn't either. I just, in parachute test flight, I realized that there's things that I could do to really destabilize canopies. And one of them was jerking a steering toggle. To me, that's equivalent of, you can stop share, I suppose. To go to, there you are, to just jerk on a steering toggle or oscillate on it. I realized that it's a yaw axis input primarily. Mm-hmm. And that was a step forward because it is a little confusing. You pull down the right toggle and eventually your right wing drops. And so there's this assumption that this is the equivalent of an aileron, and it just isn't.
No, it's more like the rudder. In flying, we have this concept of primary and secondary effective controls. Like the first thing that happens when we push on the rudder is we yaw, and then the second thing is we'll start to roll. So you can fly an airplane just pushing on the rudder, but you get like bounced around in the seats and spilling coffee and stuff. And while you could do it, it's just going to cost you more in gas, and it's going to be more wear on your aircraft. And if it were turbulent or you were near the ground and slow, and you do that, there's a much higher chance that you're going to stall, spin, crash.
And parachutes, have their own version of that. Instability collapses where you go into line twists and whack into the ground. I know, I lived it. So for me, this has been a passion to try to prevent other people from having the experience that I had. Unless you've been in a wheelchair for more than a couple of days, even one day, it's enough. It's enough for me to feel like this is one of my life missions is to help people to understand how their parachute works so that they can put it to good use, so they can use it the way it was intended, the way the air wants it to fly through it.
100% agree. And as a pilot of an aircraft, you're expected to fly optimally. Take the extra time to use your controls appropriately to lean the mixture. So we use the exact amount of fuel to get the most power, to fly at an altitude where the winds are going to help us. We always trying to, to be optimal, and there's that set expectation that you're going to do that. And in some ways I see, there's maybe a void of that in skydiving, where you're not expected to do it, and people just don't realize that they could, or maybe should take that opportunity to optimize these things.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's huge. When we consider what most people consider or would call an acceptable landing location, for instance, I was on the drop zone. All right, but were you on the target? How did you get to wherever you got? Did you think about it? Did you reanalyze afterwards? And did you notice details as you were maneuvering your pattern that caused you to make a change? Or did you just go through the motions the way you always do? I do left turns to final, and I land wherever I land. And if I don't limp back, I'm happy about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of the cultural opportunity for a cultural shift.
Yeah, the specific landing location, I see that as something that people strive for, and that they have that as a goal. I don't know how much of it ends up being, sort of they got that license, they got enough accuracy landings, and then they sort of put that off to the side. Yeah.
I think if they tighten up, because I was talking to a jumper that's been in the sport forever and ever and ever, a conference director, and she said, well, we need to be able to quantify parachute flight proficiency. And in her opinion, it is all about the landing location. That if you are good with accuracy, it's demonstrating control over the parachute, but understanding of the flying environment. And I think that's true. I think that the flare technique is also one of the things that we need to quantify, and how softly do you land, as equally valuable. But those two things need to be, sort of brought up, and not just, I did a cool sit fly. You know what I mean? I turned this many points. Those points don't save your life.
Yeah. So there's a lot of social aspect to the free fall side of this, right? So then you got some camaraderie, and hey, let's try to do this, and we're working on it, and it takes a bit more self motivation to do that for your canopy flying. Typically, I guess unless you're maybe doing crew, there isn't as much of that camaraderie.
Yeah. With swooping, it's almost, people do share experiences, and they share tips and things like that, but it's competition. Whereas, like you say, CRW is trying to build the same thing. But what if we thought of it as we're building a body of skill that is a global thing? It's a global understanding, a collective knowledge base that's improving our safety overall. Who do you want to be in the pattern with? Somebody who's terrified of their parachute, that doesn't understand it, that doesn't understand the winds? Or do you want to be right next to a person that's wide awake and understands what's going on, and still has a little RAM left over to look over at me and go, what's up, under canopy?
Sure. Hey, listen, my most memorable, my favorite flight of all last year was by far the flight we did together.
That was
in Burnaby.
Yeah, well, let me see if I can find that one, unless you already have it. I probably should have had it queued up, but I know where it is. At least I think I do. Bingo. I got it right here. I'm going to get it started. I think I have music on here or something, so I'm going to have to mute that. But yeah, so, to do, high-ish openings at the very least, and play with your friends under canopy to just, have some sort of a plan, and obviously have safety protocols. Man, it's fun, right?
Oh, that was fantastic.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll share this in just a moment, but I need to figure out how to. All right, let's turn the volume down, because you don't need to hear all that. And I know how to do share screen. I can do that. No, that's not it. I do know how to do it, I swear. Share screen, and there it is.
Since we had that flight, I've done a couple of sort of high pole, not crew, but fly with other friends and in the same kind of way, and it's
I don't. Well, I wouldn't call it crew, is it? I mean, it is flying relative in the way that a no contact four-way is still doing RW or FS, whatever you want to call it. But to me, this is a whole other thing. Actually, the beginning of this particular clip is Laura and I doing a little bit of a jump together. But so you get in the door of the plane where you know your exit order. You've thought that through because you want to get open higher, so you don't want to be that canopy traffic below the free fallers, right? So you talk about that. And I think we just did a short little free fall, but I always like to show Laura's smiling face in free fall. She's got one of the best free fall faces ever, and we got her a G3, which we use a lot in the tunnel, and she's been using the Sky more. But I do miss the open face when you're jumping with somebody where they have a beautiful smile in free fall, right?
I agree.
Expressive people, right? So I mean, this is obviously a moment of digression, but to me, it's not just about being a great canopy pilot. It's not my only goal. I want to be a great skydiver, and beyond that, I want to be a great pilot. And so people break off from their skydive, whatever they're doing. They throw the pilot chute. They deal with the canopy. They deal with coming back from the spot. But to me, then there's this new phase that is an opportunity for having fun. Now, if you notice, I tilted my camera back up for the free flyers that are out there. Free fly angle on your GoPro is not correct for canopy. So you boost up that angle just a little bit, bring it up another maybe 10, 15 degrees. This is Burnaby.
Yeah.
This is us.
That might be us.
And so I mean, have you been experimenting with different exit orders? I haven't much about the way I do it lately.
Yeah, I only did it again after with someone who did crew, and so we used her sort of military crew exit order, and it worked okay.
Which, yeah, that's fine. I think it's a good idea to have the more aggressive, heavily loaded person open a little bit higher if possible, because you don't want the person with the heavier loading under, because it's like Al Kruger, right? Captain Hook. I don't know if you know him. Captain Hook in the Sky Pirates. He had a hook for an arm, and so but he always used to say skydive down. It's faster to skydive down.
Yeah.
And so you take the person that is more skilled, more aggressive, less fearful, and with more wing loading, and you put them slightly on top, and it comes together nicely. So I've been doing it like that for years, and it seems to be the best way. So hand signals, I mean, I try to use hand and foot when possible. If you're in tight, that part doesn't matter as much. Just a quick little kick of the foot will do it.
Yeah, we were doing this sort of like sort of 180s back and forth.
Yeah, I call them switchbacks. Like on the mountains when you're hiking, you just do that 180-degree turn. You keep your eye contact, and you look at each other all the way through it. One person is looking around the back, the other one's looking straight ahead, and you just keep stretching your neck. And it's so much fun.
I love it.
It's hard to share other than to show the video, right? That's what we do with a lot of the stuff. You show the video and hope that people get the bug. But some of the viewers are probably thinking, oh man, that's crazy. Look at their end cells are right near. These guys are nuts. No, we're not nuts. We're pilots.
Yeah, well, we do formation flying, with airplanes, but the bumping wings together, that's not usually cool.
Not that part, yeah. But what you have in airplanes, of course, is comms. You have communications.
Sorry, we have what?
Comms.
Yeah. We got radio. We can talk to each other. Oh, for sure.
You probably wouldn't fly next to another airplane without being able to talk to them.
Yeah, it's a different thing. Like my standard for flying next to someone in an airplane is pretty high. I want to I want somebody that I can really trust. One guy is going to be flying pretty well straight, and then the other person will kind of form up to them and do things. But we've got a pretty good group of people that we fly with. Once a month we'll do some formation flying, and it's
fun,
a real
right?
blast. And it was very similar. There was a lot of similarity to that here, but I was still getting to know what kind of controls were going to achieve for me sort of coming up on you or speeding up. And so I need to do this. I want to do this quite a lot more, and learn this new sort of way of flying.
Yeah, like you say, it's got to be with somebody that you trust. But how else are you going to earn trust but to jump with somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Which means that you got to take a chance, hang it out there, and fly defensively, and always think about where is my out, what direction, which input, and be ready with that. But at the same time, you don't walk into a bar with your hands on your six guns. You know what I mean? They're not going to serve you a drink. So you have to be sort of expecting the best case scenario, but ready for the worst. How am I going to claw my way out of a wrap? What's our procedure for that? Talk to your local crew dogs about those things. But my main thing is don't hit any people. Just fly with them and keep looking at them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. You're like always head on a swivel. I make terrible video under canopy because I'm always looking every which way.
It's normal. I don't worry about that because even with a shaky head, it's still capturing a moment that is just, you can't speak of it in words well enough to share it in any other way. So it's mostly a visual experience, but it's also visceral. You have all these other inputs that are going on. You're hearing the wind noises. You're getting a sense of turbulence and turbulence off the other canopy and all.
Have you ever flown behind someone and collapsed or something from?
Well, I fly pretty stable parachutes, but I've never actually had a collapse from that. But I've had it shake. The lines get soft and tight. But I have seen other people fly behind another canopy and literally lose more than half their canopy and spiral out of control, even into line twists.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I've even seen cutaways from that. So yes, absolutely, that can happen. So you're aware that it's happening, and when you fly through turbulence, you just try to be proactive as much as you can by flying coordinated turns, by keeping your airspeed up and that sort of thing, and being ready to be reactive and keep your parachute on a heading, to keep that parachute flying straight, whatever that takes.
Like a lot of harness and toggle, everything you need, just give it.
Yeah, more harness than toggle when possible. This was neat because we had the third person who was on, I remember, a Stiletto 120. Does that sound right?
I think that was a 120. Yeah. Then we were, I don't know, I had a 71, and then
you're on a 71 Sensei. I'm on a 91 Sensei, loaded a little more than you are.
But it worked out okay.
Yeah. Yep. It did work well, and obviously we're in brakes when he's mostly flying hands up, but perfect speed is being there, right?
Yeah, like I did some of the testing I did. I pulled up some glide ratios, like a full flight on I had a Crossfire 2 109 for a time, and it's 2.7 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
I also had a Triathlon 120. It also had a 2.7 to 1 glide ratio. So basically the same glide ratios, two different parachutes in that sort of 2.7 range in full flight. The probably the 109 is going to be flying faster, but very similar.
That's interesting. So that's supporting the general aviation assumption that if you load up the airplane more, the glide ratio is just going to be same slope, higher airspeed, correct?
Yeah, like theoretically they should be the same, but then as you fly faster, you're going to get more parasitic drag, like your lines and your body is going to have more drag just as you go faster. As you hand out the car door, you feel it as you're faster.
Sure.
There's going to be more parasitic drag. And so that's why usually it's almost the same glide ratio, but it just gets a little bit worse as you increase your wing loading.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the faster you go, the more cross-dressing leeches you have. Parasitic drag.
Got it.
So yeah, but I think that's an important concept, because when you're traveling in say rear risers coming back from a bad spot, you're carrying more airspeed at that best glide for that input that you've chosen as the rears. So getting small in your body is really, I think, quite important. I don't know if you've done any studies on that one.
I don't have great data on what's the difference between, let's say, full flight and just having your arms out and your legs, and you can't see my legs, right?
Yeah, gingerbread man.
Fish.
Yeah, the gingerbread man.
Let's call that worst case scenario, and then pull that all in nice and small. I tried to do some tests, and I probably have some data points that could look at it. Okay, how about this? From full flight to your best glide, that increase in glide ratio is only 18%, and that's provided you're organized. You open your chest strap, you bring the slider down, you get kind of small. It's only about an 18% difference. That's no wind, and it's a much. If you had a tailwind, it would be much more than that. As we saw, it was like up to 3 times, right? 2.5, 3 times.
Right.
But so like somewhat, if 18% is all of those things, how much is just being like starfish and not maybe 5%? But it's a free 5%.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Even if you don't need it, like you might open right over the drop zone. I don't know. I'd much rather have 5% of, let's say, more time or more performance or more options.
Optimization. I mean, that you stated something really good there. Is if you really want to be a great pilot, your goal is optimization in every category, isn't it?
Yeah. When you look at an airplane, sometimes there's some optimization that takes a lot of load. Like, you've got an emergency and you have to bring up the flaps and retract the gear. But, one might take a lot of energy and the other one might be fairly easy. Like the flaps you can do in 3 seconds, but it takes like 20 seconds to take the gear up.
Right.
You have to make a decision. Optimally, you'd pull them both up. But if you're going to crash the plane because you're working on all those things, there was no point.
Right.
So,
right. Priorities. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you're trying to fry in rears, but it's taking all this energy, and then you can't manage the traffic, and you get into other problems, then maybe you need to focus in on your awareness. And
that's a big point. That's an important point, because I know that people spend a lot of time under canopy, either doing the deep brake method and staring at trying to see if the point is rising or sinking and all that stuff, when I feel like on the way back, what you should be doing more than anything is looking down below you and considering, oh, well, I got that field, that might work, the pattern would look like this. But if I make it past that, then there's that field. Sure, I hope that I win the lottery and make it all the way home, but I might not.
I need to get along the way.
Yeah, don't spend all your money hoping that you're going to win the lottery. And I think that that's how a lot of tree landings happen.
Yeah, there was last year I had one landing. It was really far out. It was like a 60 way or 40 way. I think it was 2-plane 40 way or something. It was all the way at the other end, and there was a field where everyone kind of landed, and it was off to the side. And then there was where I wanted to go, and I could have flown a straight line back. Well, I might have made it, but there was nothing to land in the middle. Yes. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to fly along the path of landable fields, and I may get back and I may not, but at least I'm not going to break my leg going into a cornfield along the way. So, sometimes you need to have be able to analyze this situation and make decisions and still be looking for traffic and
multitasking to the degree that you can, right? And don't drop all the balls that you're trying to juggle, because let's face it, some balls are more important than others. Right?
Yeah, in this case, there was like 20 people landing in this small little field. Like, even to just slot yourself in, that's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
a lot of time. So, I had to spend a lot of energy analyzing all these things. And in the end, I managed to get all the way back, but it was, there was a lot going on there. And so, I'm glad that I had spent a lot of time working on, getting to know where the right brake setting was, so then I didn't have to focus on that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That stuff becomes base frame. And like, that's what when I say having enough RAM left over.
yeah.
This is what training comes from. You don't go into battle not knowing where your bullets are. You know what I mean? You got to know how to solve your problems in all the different possible situations, so you don't have to think, and then you just aviate.
Mm-hmm.
From your gut. Here's an interesting question that came in the Q&A section. I don't know if you noticed it. So what rules do you adhere to when piloting with friends in clouds? So I assume it came in while we were demonstrating the canopy two-way stuff, canopy free flying or whatever you want to call that. So I'll let you field that one to start off with. What are your thoughts about if you happen to, let's say, you're in Norway where it's legal to jump through clouds. Okay, let's not get the Transport Canada on your ass. But so what are your thoughts about an emergency? I happen to be under canopy with with clouds and another person.
Wow, I don't know that I've analyzed that particular scenario, but I would hope that we're not in a situation where there's a lot of people all busting through the clouds all at the same time.
Sometimes.
And
been there.
Yeah, well, I've seen it, where it's the clouds kind of popped in real quick,
yeah.
And they didn't realize it, sort of. But for me, I'd probably want to analyze, where people are before. Let's say I'd realize, okay, well, this is going to be an eventuality. Right. I can see that this is coming, so I'm going to build space, and I'm going to try to arrange myself to be in a place where I couldn't get hit by someone else. Like I'm far enough away and I'm going away from the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so like kind of like tracking, right? If there was clouds and you were tracking, you'd all just want to go in the opposite direction. So I think that would be my number one priority. And then thereafter, as a result of that, you may have to pick a new place to land, because of that decision, rather than everybody kind of going towards maybe the landing area and then.
Well, that's a good point. We are all headed in the same direction. Coming back from the spot, if people knew where to go, they'd probably be going the same direction. And if everybody was wearing, a GPS, then we know we'd all be parallel lines and we wouldn't have to worry very much. But people aren't wearing these yet. There's only a few of us, which tells me that we need to go back to some of the old school rules of, if you don't know where to go, first of all, picking a direction and going that way. If you don't know which way the drop zone is, you have a 1 in 360-degree chance of being right.
Right.
Which probably is going to put you in the wrong direction. So I say do slow turns. Slow turns, maybe fly straight and then turn straight and then turn would be, I think, smarter, like a box. So you're not picking up too much airspeed.
I'm not going anywhere in particular.
Yeah, until you come out and you go, oh, there it is. But how many times have you been, you're flying straight, I think that's the way, and you go, oh, no, as soon as you come out of the clouds. And so I think it's a reasonable way to go. And I mean, there is turning to the right. Some drop zones, they say turn to the left.
All right. So I would be worried if I was kind of going in circles that my friends would also be going in circles, maybe the same way. But, then if I hit them, I don't know.
I mean, if we're all sort of occupying our own space, as opposed to, the risk for me is two canopies that are going 40, 50 miles an hour coming out of nowhere in opposing directions. You're not going to have time to react.
Yeah.
So maybe
you're not going to see them at what distance? Like, 20 feet or something, maybe. If you're in a cloud.
No time.
Not gonna work.
I mean, but if you know that they're there, I mean, I've done plenty of jumps where, I did a high pull in Norway in Østera, which is the biggest drop zone in Norway, near Oslo. Well, okay, it's not that near Oslo, but they call it Oslo Parachute Club. And we did a hop and pop, full altitude, a whole bunch of high performance canopies to fly in formation. But it was, I mean, cloudy. It was cloudy. We didn't see anything till we came out of the clouds at about 3 grand. And we just followed the leader. But one of the leader had a GPS, and he knew where to go. And we're flying around the valleys, chasing each other. And as long as you keep people close, you know where they are. And it worked out great. And it was visually stunning.
Yeah.
I was nail-biting terrified the whole time. I was terrified. But I enjoyed it, I have to say. It was really, really fun. But it's on the edge of control, isn't it?
Well, as long as you can see people, you know, if you were close enough that you could see, same thing, right? Like if you're doing like a 4-way and you go through the clouds, if everybody's kind of together and you can see each other, you know,
yeah,
that's not so bad. But then everyone's kind of trying to join the base in a cloud. Well, that can make me a little more nervous.
Yeah, you gotta weigh these things out carefully. So
awesome.
So what do you think? Should I fly with this?
I think you should.
I mean, actually, like check in, you know, because I do a lot of my jumping away from home. Mm-hmm. Could you explaining this to TSA?
I took one. I took one really? The earlier model, and I just threw it in the my carry-on, my check luggage. I didn't carry it on.
Yeah,
but I don't know. They it doesn't look good.
Yes.
They can scan it, you know.
Really, I'm not a bad guy, I swear. There's no plastic explosives in this.
Oh,
yeah. Now this is neat too. I also should point out that you've got
sort of the wingsuit version of it. It sort of goes on your helmet and
to replace the tail.
Yeah.
And it's got a GoPro mount. And so this way you're getting data, true data. You know, and people are like, I have a flight site. Why do I need that? And maybe you can explain to them a little bit better why this is better. These data are better than. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Okay, so I guess better. We'd have to quantify what better means, but in an aerodynamic sense, you know, for somebody studying the flight characteristics of a wingsuit or an aircraft, the aerodynamic data comes from pitot pressure and descent rate. That's the primary primary data points that you want to be able to analyze and create glide ratios and graphs. If you were, you know, trying to have like some kind of a race or you're trying to compare your data to a friend who might be flying through the same air mass as you, then the wind is kind of canceled out in that sense. And something like a flight site that has GPS would, I think, be better in that it's so much easier. It's much easier to analyze the data and get something useful out of it and keep people interested. So, you know, maybe if I spent more time, I could make this tool more attainable to just everyone. You know, they could plug it in and see graphs right away on their iPhone. And
you do artwork, right? We were talking about that earlier. People are taking the flight sites up and actually, like, you can write your name on the ground. It helps if you're like Mo Valletta, right? Done, right? Which he did. He said he did that. Which is, Mo, if you're watching this, we got to get you on Casual Chat. Mo Valletta's an amazing guy. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, but it let us get some data about wingsuits, you know, what the glide ratio was of a particular wingsuit, you know, independent of wind on a given day. But I've seen people do things like they fly one way with a wingsuit and then turn around and go the other way. And then, you know, they can get an idea, you know, if you got 3.5 and 3.2, well, it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, sure. You can do that. But here's a thing that I got to bring it up. And to you and I, this is probably kind of base frame assumption, but maybe not to everybody. Based on the actual data that you've collected, and of course your general knowledge as a flight instructor and whatnot, when I face into the wind with my parachute or my wingsuit or my airplane, glide ratio versus when I'm going with the wind, my true glide ratio.
So this is the glide ratio that your aircraft is achieving through the air, right? Like almost if we erase the Earth, right? We're just looking through the air. Well, wind has no factor at all. Your aircraft can't tell wind in any way. When you're in the wind, provided the wind is constant.
Right. Yeah. Turbulence.
Yeah, I mean the only exceptions to that would be things where the air is shifting, like if you go through thermals or there's turbulence. All of those things the aircraft can feel, but when we're normally flying our parachute and flying back to the drop zone, we're in mostly stable air, and in that sense, your parachute can't feel it whether you're going into the wind or out. There's no difference. It's same really when you're flaring your parachute. Your parachute doesn't know the difference whether we're flying into the wind or we've got a tailwind when we're landing. Your feet will notice. If you land with the tailwind, but the parachute, the aircraft, it can't tell the difference.
Yeah. It's like a different channel of reality, and they're both valid. It's just the ground doesn't become valid until you're at the ground. And then suddenly, wow, that's a lot of ground speed. Right?
That's right.
I think it's an important idea, because people constantly are saying to me, well, so that means, so when I'm in a run coming home from an upwind spot, if I spread out my body under canopy, is that going to push me home faster? I go, oh boy, okay, we got a lot of work to do. No, sweetie, no, it's not going to do that. Just like going to deep breaks doesn't expose more of your tail to the wind. The relative wind is caused by your motion through the air.
Yeah, unfortunately, the wind coming at you is the important thing. The fact that you're in the air as it's moving, it doesn't matter. An analogy would be like if you're a goldfish in a fish tank in a truck driving down the highway.
I use the fish tank on wheels metaphor regularly. It's a good one.
The goldfish doesn't realize that he's going 100 miles an hour down the highway or backwards. It doesn't matter to the goldfish. He's just in this body of liquid or air. It doesn't really matter. Unless the goldfish tries to, jump out of its tank and land on the pavement, he's going to notice if we're going fast or not.
Right. Exactly. Now, this leads me to another topic that's very related, which is crosswind landing. Right? So the way I understand it, and you've got way more experience teaching general aviation than I do, but in a crosswind landing, there is a tendency when entering ground effect close to the ground that the windward wing, the wing that's on so if it's a crosswind going this way, it wants to rise and turn the aircraft during that phase. Is that correct?
That's true. That is a very common problem. And so pilots are taught to land with the wing down into the wind. And in an aircraft, it's really important that you land with the wheels going down the runway. And so the way that you achieve that is you bank your wing into the wind and you land pointed down the runway. This is pretty difficult to do in a parachute situation. So I haven't found a way that you can sort of crab land, and it doesn't really work with a parachute. But it turns out that our feet don't only go like this. Like we can kind of go sideways a little bit, and so we can make up for pretty decent crosswind that way. But when you touch down in an aircraft or a parachute, if we had the wings level, as soon as we touch down, there's a tendency for air to kind of get underneath this wing and lift it up, and it'll pull off to the side. And you'll see that very regularly at a drop zone if you're landing with crosswinds, where people get sort of pulled over. And rather than do this thing where you land with the wing down, what I find works, and I think you may have taught me this, was just to turn into the wind after you've landed, just whatever, 10, 15, 45 degrees, if you turn into the wind, now it's just you didn't actually land into the wind, but you just turn, and then that doesn't happen at all.
And a little bit of gentle yawing, right, heading change during the flare without a lot of roll angle, right, without a lot of bank, just smoothly as you level off symmetrical, you try to fly down your runway, and as you lose airspeed, you're slowly bringing the nose over into the wind, bringing the canopy's energy more aligned to the wind, and so you're less likely to have that windward wing lift up, and then you know people, they turn off the wind line worse. Then they look where they're going, and as they prepare to run in that direction, they do the things that cause it to tip over worse, and they get hurt sometimes, or at least they look ridiculous. So I think that the main issue is that as you're flaring your parachute, don't look where the wind is drifting you towards. Look away from that into the wind line itself, like a salmon swimming upstream. Don't give up on your dream of spawning.
You just look, just looking, even just your eyes will be enough to just cause you to turn just this ever so slightly. It'll make the biggest difference. And
before you run out of airspeed, before you run out of altitude, you got no energy left in the system. It's not much you can do other than, you know, you touch down and just try to keep that parachute kited, you know, kited into the wind. But before that happens, you still have a lot of maneuvering capability.
Well, absolutely.
Even in the low end of it.
Yeah, and you know, when flying airplanes or teaching people to fly airplanes, you know, keeping them flying as long as possible. Often, you know, as soon as they touch down, they got one wheel on the ground. They're like, "Oh, I'm now a ground airplane," which is operated differently than a flying airplane.
Very true.
They don't have to be, you know, like once you become a proficient pilot, the transition from one to the other, you realize that they're kind of all one and the same, you know. But there's a tendency to kind of turn off, and that happens very much, you know, in skydiving as well, where you can see people as soon as they get one foot on the ground, they just stop being a pilot, and you know, they're now just kind of dragged along, or
it's not over till you're in the bathroom. Right. I mean, it's not even over in the packing area. People trip over lines all the time, right? You're still in danger. But I think that's an important idea. And I don't know if you're as into kiting your parachute as I am. But I learned a hell of a lot from standing on the ground with my parachute over my head. Either straight ahead or with a half twist and the risers facing with the wind, right? My head is facing with the wind. And you know, just flying with reverse and working all my inputs and studying the wrinkles, you know, so watching the inflation, the depressurization that happens depending on the angle of attack that I'm flying at the time, or what I do to the inputs, you know.
Yeah, I don't do that very often, but you did mention it, and you suggested I do that with that new parachute that you had made me. So I'm gonna give that a go. And
yeah, for sure. You learn a hell of a lot about stability alone. It's neat. You take a parachute that's a known thing, and you take it out and in the wind, and you fly it around, and you jerk it, and the things, it just, no matter what you do, it just wants to stay at the end of the lines. It wants to stay pressurized. And something that's just not right, within 5 minutes of kiting, you know. I did that with the Nova. After the Nova had been grounded, I pulled one up, and I was like, oh my God, if they had done that, if they had kite tested that wing, it wouldn't have killed so many people. They never would have released it. Yeah, but it would just drop out of the ground. Nova, right?
Wow. You asked me to keep a track on time, and we've been just over an hour.
Good. No. I'm curious. I'm curious if there's any questions that are showing up for us on Facebook. I'm going to take a quick look before we go, because I love answering questions directly. It's an awesome thing. Let's see if it's here. It looks, no. What about wind gliders, cause they are wider and narrower? I'm not sure the wind, so talking about gliders.
We're talking about aspect ratio, narrower?
Well, I don't know, it's Len Evans. He's here. Maybe, Len, you can pop into the chat or something.
Um, well, gliders do have like long, skinny wings,
Yeah.
and that helps with better glide ratio.
Yeah.
Kind of long, skinny wings have better glide ratio, and so I think that's why paragliders tend to have really long, inflatable ram air. They like parachutes. What do they call them? The wings.
Yeah.
And so you just get a better glide ratio that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, well, they are absolutely astonishingly beautiful to me. To lay a paraglider out on the ground and just look at it and see how the more rigid fabric, you can do things that you can't do in skydiving if you don't have to actually deploy it.
Mm-hmm.
Things that you can't do in skydiving, but they are so much fun to play with. It's a different animal for sure, but you can really you can become a better, well-rounded pilot, I think, by exploring different vehicles. So I
Love flying everything I could get my hands on. If they'll let me sit in it, I'll fly it.
Yeah, it's true. So I'm going to see if there's any other questions here. But yeah, the other thing that I didn't really get to talk to you too much about here, that maybe we can discuss this at a later date as a topic, is many skydivers have thought about getting their pilot's license, or at least sort of starting down that road to see if they like it. But I mean, you started flying, I assume, quite young, right?
Well, I started flying gliders when I was 22, something like that. I was flying remote control airplanes before that, and I just love flying. Like anything I could fly, I just absolutely love. So, but I definitely did that before skydiving. Came to skydiving after. So, I don't have perhaps the same experience, but I do know a number of skydivers that have gone and started to learn to fly. In fact, I taught one of my aerobatic students was a skydiver, or still is, and
one right here.
there you go. Yeah, it's there's so much to learn, and I think anybody who takes that on will learn a lot more about flying their parachute than they probably thought originally.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of decision making, and there's just a change in attitude that you can then apply back to something you're already doing. Mm-hmm. And I gain so much from that. Anything I can do to learn and adapt my flying and improve it, I love it.
Absolutely. I think that's, to me, to become a more well-rounded pilot with deeper understanding. The graph that the diagram that you brought up earlier, I thought was so cool, where it's the idea of trying to learn through experience and to sort of adapt in the moment and make it up, and you have that little area of improvement, versus taking the time to learn the information ahead of time and then apply it. I don't know if you got that. You know what I'm talking about? That diagram that you.
I can pull it up.
I think if it will only take a moment, because I think it would be a great place to sort of.
This one?
No, not that one.
What, this one?
Not that one. No, wasn't
sorry, the knowledge one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and I accidentally deleted it here. I'll find it here for you.
You accidentally deleted it. But it sort of relates to that diagram that's in the parachute and its pilot, which has been in a lot of other places too. It's sort of like there's what you know, what you know you don't know, and then what you don't know, which is a big chunk of the pie. But this takes it a little further, applying this old aviation concept that the sky makes a terrible classroom. And it's true that there are certain things we can only learn through direct experience. Right, through, they call it experiential learning model, to do something and feel the results of it, to see the results, and you have that moment of epiphany, and that's great. But to me, that's to test theories that you in understandings that you created on the ground in sort of a quieter brain, a less sort of eyes bloodshot There we go. Developing pilot skills. So this outside is, maybe you can explain this a little better than I can.
Yeah, well, there's sort of two approaches, and I wouldn't say, everybody fits into just one or the other, but in general, if you're learning something from the outside in, like, we're learning to land our parachute, and we're taught the execution, the outside of this onion. How do you land? Well, you just go, 3, 2, 1, flare, and you do that 12 times, and they say, okay, well, you're good enough, you can do that on your own. You've learned execution, but you haven't really learned much about decisions or how to apply those, or the knowledge, that the sort of base theory. And so what you get is this kind of little triangle of skill by learning from the outside in. But if you take the opportunity to start with a base of knowledge, some theory about how parachutes work, and how they land, and your eyes, and the sort of mental aspects of landing, and then you learn when to apply these things to specific situations. You then learn what kind of decisions do I make, like when do I land this way, when do I land that way. And then finally, you then figure out how to execute that. You would end up with this much bigger slice of skill, from starting from the inside and working your way out. But it does take some time. You've got excellent resources, videos, and books that you can use to sort of build that sort of nut in the middle, and work your way out towards becoming a better pilot.
Yeah.
And there are other resources, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my objective in general is to help people to get access to more truthful knowledge, and let that turn into exercises that they can test and practice and get dialed in on, so that becomes instinctual. And as you start to do those things, you start to feel more powerful as a pilot to solve your problems. And when I feel powerful as a pilot, I don't feel that much fear. I feel freedom. I feel joyful, and I can do, pretty much whatever I want. And obviously there's always the funny, they're like, oh, I didn't see that coming. I didn't know that could go wrong, or I didn't know that airplane could, my friend Lurch almost got run over by an airplane flying over the drop zone as he was flying his wingsuit just a couple days ago.
Oh no.
Right? Blah, da, 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 da. I'm flying my wingsuit. He's flying the most gigantic wingsuit ever built, right? That Tony made for him. And he's up there for, if he wants to go for, 5 minutes, he can go for 5 minutes. And he's just enjoying himself, and he's in, extreme power. And then sure enough, somebody just shows up out of nowhere. So you have to balance that, sense of omnipotence with a little humbleness, don't you? That you don't see everything, do you?
In Canada, as far as I know, almost all the drop zones, it's legal for airplanes to go blasting through. Not smart, but there isn't a law that prevents them from flying over a drop zone. If there was an accident, they would look at it and say, well, the pilot didn't do the right thing. He didn't avoid that area because there was some danger.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter if you got in an accident. So, you really got to watch. And
yeah,
it can be hard to spot an airplane. But if you got, a few minutes looking around,
you'd think, but we get goal oriented. Yeah, we're like focused on what we're doing. Maybe we're chasing somebody, or chasing the valleys and the clouds, or just playing around having fun. There is that unconsidered possibility, isn't there?
Certain airplanes, depending on their colors and how they're organized, you can imagine a glider has a tow plane, and then there's like a string tie them together. It's like 200 feet long string. And there are days, and we'd stand there at the gliding club just looking up, and you could see the tow plane, and you could see the string, but you couldn't see the glider.
Interesting.
Just the way the light is, and so on, and it has to be there, and it's that difficult sometimes to see aircraft. So it really helps that to look really hard and
look again. you know,
Looking.
right? Look in every direction more than once because the light may have changed and is now illuminating that unconsidered possibility made of metal.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, the sky is big. Like that. That saves a lot of us.
Yeah, yeah, for
Just
sure.
luck. We don't run into each other sometimes.
No, not that all. Yeah, it's surprising that we're all sort of going to the same place and manage to avoid each other. But I think part of it is that human beings, when we're in this sort of passionate, excited mode when we're flying, we're generally pretty wide awake. And so as long as we don't get too stuck into the goal-oriented behaviors where we limit our consciousness to one specific goal, people are pretty good about looking around mostly. And then you see an accident, you go, see, we have a problem. It's like, no, we just have to continue to do what we've been doing. Maybe expand a little more, maybe assume a little less, maybe fly a little bit more predictably.
Mm. Well, parachutes I find are fairly easy to spot in contrast to airplanes. Like they're very slow and they tend to be all roughly around the same altitude. You can kind of expect them. So I agree with you. That people looking around is rare that you just miss someone that would be near you if you are looking around well.
Yeah.
But
doesn't mean we should stop being focused on. To me, like focus is two channels. It's like this intense focus, I'm reading my altimeter, I'm adjusting the radio frequency, and at the same time I have this wide focus of trying to see behind my head, trying to feel in my body and listen with my ears at the sounds of the engine. All of that, I mean, being a pilot is a holistic experience, isn't it?
Oh yes, very much.
At
There's
least
lots and lots of inputs. There's far more inputs than you can process often.
Yeah.
When we're teaching, what we'll often do is sort of load them to 110%, 120%. There's just too much going in. It's not all coming in. Some of it's falling off. But you get them loaded somewhere around there. And in not all cases, but a lot of time, that's when they're really learning at the fastest rate possible. It's expensive, flying, right? We try not to, spend too much time where they're underutilized and they're not learning as much as they can. But eventually that 120%, comes down and they can handle it all. He's just throwing some more stuff on the pile.
Yeah. Yeah. Little by little, right? I mean, this is an interesting aspect, and I think that you're definitely, I mean, pretty much everybody I've had on Casual Chat, I want to do this again with you, right? And you're definitely like,
thank you so much for
there's
inviting
so many,
me.
yeah, man, you're awesome. There's a topic that I want to sort of dog ear the page in that one is the consciousness behind the machine, the mind process of managing these multiple systems, but also managing the pilot as one of the systems. It's something that needs to be discussed.
There's a lot behind that one.
Yeah. So I'm not going to actually, I'm not going to pop open that one just yet. I'm just planting the seed.
We'll leave it for next time.
Yeah, we'll leave it for next time. But yeah, but I really want to thank you hugely. I mean, you've got a wealth of knowledge in a lot of different aspects of aviation, and I respect you a lot in a lot of
thank you.
ways. And I thank you for this project that I will continue working on and lots of other ones. Looking forward to more collaboration.
Yeah, well, that's great. I hopefully I can meet up with you again this year. We can do some more flying together.
Yeah, for sure. I think we will. All right. Well, have a very great evening. And again, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Have a great night.
a silver car with a borrowed guitar, ready to travel so far.